I have got to be fair. This is what Obama said. He told Donald Trump, this is the #1 most important thing in the world is to deal with North Korea, and nobody has any clue what to do. And Trump seems to act just like him going on. They seem to be on the same wavelength. I was thinking, you know, this might be the one thing that he's really talented at, is communicating with that guy, because the two of them are the same. And now it seems to have worked. So, you know, I thought Trump was going to destroy the world with nuclear weapons, and it seems to be the opposite.
Like playing chicken. Like, you know, look at this guy and say, this guy is just as crazy as I am.
Exactly. Well, you know, I knew guys from Russia, and they told me that the Russians loved Ronald Reagan because he was just like their leaders. They understood him.
Yeah.
They say they could not understand America at all. Like when Jimmy Carter was impeached, they said they thought, and then Al Haig got up and said everything is under control. They thought there had been a military coup, the military had taken over America, and he had been executed because there's no way in the world that having sex with an intern could possibly matter to anybody. Yeah. That's obviously a cover story, and there's been a military coup, and so they prepared to like they thought there'd been a revolution in America because they just don't understand how we think over here. I don't really understand it either. Like overthrowing the government is just unthinkable around here. If you propose that, you will never get anywhere. Everybody wants to do is run a candidate, no matter how crazy they are. They want to run a candidate, and the recent election seems to show that no matter how crazy you are, you could win. So it's true. Somehow we have this unshakable faith in our system here, which is baffling the rest of the world because everybody else just tears it all down in a place like you had Mao in China. I mean, nobody else. Yeah. Somehow Americans get madder than hell, march around with guns, scream and swear, and then run some candidate for election. They just don't think a military conquering of the government is going to solve their problems over here. And I don't know why. Anyway, I can't explain America, but...
Body slammed the reporter and then he got elected anyway the day before the election.
Oh yeah.
I'm like, this is just crazy.
Yeah. And the guy in Alabama having sex with the 14-year-old girls, and he was very almost won. And they all said, nobody cares down here. We're good Christians. That's perfectly fine. And I'm like, and the Christians are for Trump. And I'm like, I don't understand this place. I seem to be living inside a Three Stooges movie. Where some complete idiot wanders up to Washington, becomes president, stumbles around, acts like a fool, and turns out he's doing fine. He wins. He saves the world. Like, this is what would happen in a Three Stooges movie. That appears to be reality. Anyway, politics is just as baffling as it's always been, so let's talk about computers. Computers are this fine artificial world where things like logic and math actually work. And if you do things right, they work, and if you do them wrong, they don't work, which is fantastically not true in Washington. Anyway, it's chapter 11, I think. Let me check. By the way, it's probably good to look at the scores. Okay, here we are, chapter 11, wireless. And here's the scores. And a bunch of people, looks like 4 people already have an A. They're the green ones, so they don't have to do any more, although they're welcome to. 188%, wow, well, that's midterm, okay. I don't think there's enough points to do that. Anyway, and I think there's some conferences. I think there's another conference to add here. Looks like there's 90 points of people that did a CTF for a conference, or the column is not there yet. There was a CTF last week. And next time I teach this class, I'm going to strongly push National Cyber League. National Cyber League is a contest which I tried it like 5 or 6 years ago and it wasn't good enough. But some students did it this time and it was really very good. So it's somewhere on my list. There. You have to sign up in advance. You have to be a student. You have to pay like a $25 fee. It's only at certain times. So it was kind of annoying compared to other CTFs, and that's part of why I didn't do it. But several students did it, and they showed me the challenge they did. And they look really good. It looks like a normal CTF. All the categories are there. And so next semester, I think I'll really push this. Instead of doing my homework, do the NCL. But anyway, this semester it's too late to sign up and all that. They're full of administrative formalities like high school football, which is what it's modeled after, because they're hoping to really become that important. And so it's a little bit more annoying than most hacker-oriented CTFs that are just sort of open to the whole world on the internet. But it's pretty good stuff. So anyway, we're down to wireless. So I'm going to talk about how wireless works, the standards, and the process of authentication, and then how you attack it. you start with war driving to find your wireless networks, although that's really standard now. And then there's ways to hack into wireless networks, although there is no powerful way to hack into a modern wireless network. Wireless network security was really bad until they came out with WPA and then WPA2. And if you just correctly configure either of those things, you're pretty much fine unless you make a ridiculous mistake like using a guessable password. So as you know, everything is wireless these days. Wireless networks are surprisingly sloppy. But Ethernet networks are pretty sloppy in the first place. You have hubs, a lot of collisions, a lot of packets get resent. On wireless networks, it's much, much worse, to where a lot of the packets get lost and resent. But the end result is it works well enough that everyone puts up with that inefficiency and uses it anyway. One of the major problems with wireless networks is that almost all the radio frequency band has already been reserved for proprietary purposes. And there's only a couple of narrow regions available for general purpose, and every gadget you use is crammed into a couple of radio frequency bands, all interfering with each other. But it's so handy, we all put up with that and use it anyway. So as far as getting on the internet with normal data transfer, you use this system. You have an access point that has a wireless card, and then you have and that has a cable. So you're really using wired Ethernet to get to the internet. You're only using wireless for the last 50 or 100 yards to reach the people in the room. That's the kind of wireless that is common. There are other types like WiMAX, like the tower in Seattle, that can flank a whole city from one point. But this is the most common, Wi-Fi, only for use within a room or close to a tower. So your access point is a transceiver that takes wireless signals and turns them into wired signals and sends them up the wire to your cable modem or whatever you use to get to the internet. The access point announces the network with broadcasts, and the computers join it there. These things are called SSIDs. It's the name of a network, and every packet sent and received on a wireless network has to send the SSID in plain text, because you might have multiple networks on the same channel in the same place. And if you go anywhere in public these days, you'll see 40 or 50, which is why the interference is ridiculous, because unless you're using 802.11g or later, they're all crammed into 3 channels. So there's like a dozen networks on the same channel. So I don't know if this is true. When I was a kid, I read in comic books that in Japan, they had paper walls so you could hear your neighbors all the time. And you just learned to politely ignore conversation that was for other people and not for you. And I don't know if that's true, but that's how wireless networks really work. Your computer in the access point is picking up all the traffic and politely ignoring all the traffic that's not aimed for it, which it uses the SSID to determine, as well as the MAC address. So the SSIDs and the MAC addresses are sent in plain text in every packet, and you can't do anything about that because it has to be there to address the packet. So any kind of security that depends on the SSID or the MAC address is very fragile, because all anybody has to do is run Wireshark and Stiff, and they can see that stuff. So this list here is a list of SSIDs that is picked up from the broadcast packets, which announce the network. And typically it's set to a default value by the manufacturer. It is considered an unwise practice to leave it at the default value. There are 2 disadvantages. The first one is you often can't tell it from everybody else that leaves it at default value. There was a guy I read about on the internet that said, I decided to upgrade my wireless service to a different provider, so I turned off my router, went to plug in the new router, and I was still on the internet. I had been using my neighbor's router for years without ever knowing it, because we both just had the default. And that's not so common now, because as soon as somebody can get on your network, they start downloading junk over BitTorrent, and you get all mad at them. So everybody pretty much encrypts their stuff now. But anyway, you can change the SSID, and if you do, that prevents your neighbors from just using it by accident, and it also prevents, it makes it a little bit harder for attackers to attack it. Almost all your consumer electronics, if you pay $40 for a router, you ought to imagine that is probably not very secure, and it really is not very secure. The way they make that, like all embedded devices, is they start with a Linux operating system, they strip it down to the very essentials, they use a really old version of everything, they typically never update it at all, and it's typically very vulnerable because they really don't think it matters very much. If somebody hacks into your router, you can just, and typically people reset it to factory default frequently, like at a coffee house, because it crashes and they don't know anything, and they just know hold down the red button and it will work again. So it's actually down to the default password and everything. So people typically don't take security very seriously on them. And even if they do change what they can change, like the password, is typically very vulnerable because there are just foolish mistakes in the operating system. There are brands of routers that just have the root password in the source code of the admin web page. Other ones have just a URL you can go to where you get to execute commands without logging in first. And there's silly mistakes like that quite often on this cheap consumer electronics. So here's some examples of default SSIDs like Linksys and Netgear and such. So when you configure the thing, when you plug it in, many people just plug it in and use it. But if you do go through a configuration, you go to your default gateway in your browser, and you'll see a proprietary configuration page. There are always about the same dozen settings here, but the layout and the graphics just randomly changes from brand to brand. So you can change the SSID to something else. You can change the channel, or you can set it to automatically hunt for a channel without a lot of interference. And you can decide whether you want to use WEP or WPA or WPA2. You should avoid WEP and use WPA or WPA2. Anything. WPA and WPA2 are both fine. WEP is almost as bad as open. Anybody can hack in. I used to do it as homework in this class, but I dropped it because almost nobody uses WEP anymore. In fact, a lot of routers don't even have WEP anymore. The only reason why you would use WEP these days is if you have equipment on your network that is so old that it only can use WEP. And you don't want to replace that equipment, and instead you're willing to settle for a low-level security. I did this for a landlord at one time. He had a WEP-enabled internet radio he was using. His house is kind of isolated from the neighbors. Security is not a big concern. Availability is the main concern, so I set him up with WEP. But you should be aware, of course, that anything you send over WEP network can very easily be broken into, so I shouldn't be sending secrets over it without another layer of encryption. But that's true of all wireless encryption. Even if you use WPA2, that only encrypts it while it's in the air. Once it hits the wire, it's done using WPA2. So if you're not encrypting your stuff with another layer of encryption, like a VPN or HTTPS, then you're throwing it to the wind anyway. So that's why there's a couple of defects came out about a year ago in WPA that would let you penetrate the encryption, and everybody's freaking out. And I said, crack it was, with a K they called it. I said, well, that's nice, but I don't see why it really matters, because nobody should be entrusting wireless encryption to protect them anyway, because once it hits the wire, it's gone. But anyway, all right, so some people say you should turn off the SSID broadcast. If you do that, then you will not appear in the list of available wireless networks. So if I click this, you see there's a few available networks here. And if you turn on a router and turn off the broadcast, you will not appear in this list. You'll have to hit this button, join other network, and then you'll have to type in the name of the network. You have to know it. So what this does is it annoys your legitimate users. They have to go through this process. It's not really going to stop the attackers. It will stop casual attackers that just try to see what they can find. But anybody that wants to join can just run Wireshark, sniff the packets. If it's in use, there will be packets flying around with that name on it, or they can run Kismet that does this automatically, and then they will find it. So it's not really very hidden. It's only hidden from a very superficial hunt. And it does irritate your normal users by making them go through this extra step. And what's even worse is now if you have a WLAN that spreads over several access points, like City College has 300 or 400 of these access points, and it's all on one network. So you can start a download with a laptop, pick it up, and carry it to another room, and your laptop will read the beacons. And notice this, I'm moving further from this one, it's getting weaker. I'm moving closer to this one, it's getting stronger. When this one gets stronger, it will disconnect from that one, connect to this one, and your download will keep going. Just like when you carry your phone around, your phone calls keep going because your phone lets go of this tower and connects to that tower, and then lets go of this tower and connects to that tower. It's handing off. And you can't do that if you turn off the beacons. So, turning off the beacons is often recommended, but in practice, it's often more trouble than it's worth. There's a list of like the 4 stupidest wireless security measures, and that was one of them. But you can turn it off here. There'll be somewhere in there a way to turn off SSID broadcast. All right, so the NIC's main function is to turn the wireless network into wired signals. You can get wireless NICs all over the place. Most of them, the only thing people care about is whether they are modern enough to speak the fastest modern protocol. If you are an attacker and you want to hack into WEP-enabled networks, which is going the way of the dodo bird, then you need a NIC that can perform injection. There are 4 modes of a wireless network card. I'll just write them up here on the board. There's master and managed. And those are the only ones anybody uses normally. The master mode is the AP. Managed mode is your client, like your laptop. That's all the modes that a normal person would use. But there are 2 more, and one is monitor, and the last one is injection. Monitor mode means you can listen to signals that are not addressed to you. In wired networks, they call it promiscuous mode. And injection mode means you can send packets that lie and claim not to come from you. So both of those are of use only to security people and hackers. But if you want to hack into web-enabled networks quickly, you need injection mode, and very few NICs can do that. The hardware in NICs is all the same. There's really only about 5 brands of hardware, and there's 100 brands of label on the outside, but it's all the same chipset inside. But the drivers that enable you to do these features are often not available. So there's only a small number of NICs that can do injection, and they sell at DEF CON and other places. You buy an old used NIC that has this property if you want to really be a wireless hacker. Yeah?
So monitor mode and injection mode only enable NICs have.
No, those are any NIC in principle has it. Most NICs will not let you use these modes just from the driver. And if you want to crack into a web-enabled network, or then you want to buy a NIC that has these ability. And if there's 2 ways to do it, you use Linux like Corley, and you go to DEF CON or order online and get an old NIC where someone has reverse engineered the driver and giving you a driver, or you pay money and get a there's a Windows proprietary one. It costs about $100. Air PCAP. You buy an Air PCAP NIC, and then you can run Windows-based software and do it, and you just charge a lot of money for that feature. And that's what, of course, corporate people do. And then you can sniff traffic that's not yours, and you can replay other people's traffic in the network, which are what you have to do to crack web. Anyway, just like electric power and Ethernet cables, you have standards. Now, the way this works is anybody can make anything and put it in the marketplace, and you can sell it. And this happens. Cisco in particular constantly invents brand new stuff that is not standard, but is awesome, and sells it, and people buy it, and that means you have to buy all Cisco equipment. EIGRP is one of the many things they have where you can use it, and it's great, but you have to have nothing but Cisco routers on your network because nobody else can run it. That's how things start. But after a while, most people would like to make their invention into a standard, and that's what the IEEE does. It's a group of engineers that form a committee, they analyze something, and the vendors show up and propose their products. And one of them wins and becomes the standard. Then it gets a code number from the IEEE. Then everybody can make devices that meet the standard. There is, however, I think, no legal force to it and no real auditing or anything. So in fact, when people do sell boxes that say we speak 802.11g or something on the label, they don't really obey 100% that standard. Just like your browser doesn't really obey the RFCs, they are manufactured by somebody that makes what their interpretation of the standard. They take their engineers and tell them to read the documents and make it, and then they make most of it. They get it to where it mostly works and sell it, or if they're a more careful manufacturer, they actually carefully make it obey the standard. So nothing's ever perfectly obeying the standards, but the idea is if you have a standards compliant device, you can mix devices of different brands. I could have an Ethernet cable from one maker and a switch from another maker and a router from another maker and plug them together because they all obey the standard. And this works about as much as saying we can have smooth traffic because everybody obeys the traffic laws. It works most of the time, but not all the time. I was just amazed when Kirk, you may have met him around here, I upgraded my computer from XP to Vista and I couldn't get it on the internet. And he said, yeah, that router is incompatible with Vista on your computer. I said, that's impossible. There's a standard. He said, yeah, that's the way it is. And that was really true. And that's not supposed to happen, but it does happen. That those devices did not really obey the standard, and that's the way it is. The worst one was Bluetooth and Apple. My friend bought a speaker, a wireless speaker for his phone, and he said, oh, I can only use it on this phone. And I said, oh, no, you can use it on any phone. Bluetooth is a standard. He said, no, you can't. I spent an hour trying. He's not kidding. You go in the store, and they'll say, do you want an Apple Bluetooth speaker or an Android Bluetooth speaker? Because you have to buy one So one or the other or both of them is seriously not obeying the standard, at least as of a few years ago. Maybe they fixed that now, I don't know. But I was pretty offended. As a matter of principle, this is me being a theoretician. You know, in the real world, nothing really lives up to the theory. So 802.11 was the first standard for wireless networks long ago at only 1 or 2 megabits per second. And this started GSMA-CA. On a wired network, you have collision detection because the electric signal stays at very closely the same voltage from one end of the cable to the other end of the cable. So there are certain voltage ranges used for Ethernet traffic. And if 2 packets collide, the voltages reach impossible levels. Now, it's more complicated than this in a modern network, but in the early stage, you would have 0 for 0 and 5 volts for 1. And if 2 packets would collide, you'd have 10 volts for 1. Now it's done with transitions and a little more complicated, but the same principle applies. So you can detect collisions by detecting voltages that are illegal. And when the collision is detected, it sends a jamming signal and resends them. That is GSMA-CD. That's what Ethernet does, collision detection and retransmit. You cannot do this on a wireless network because on a wireless network, just like light, the signal strength falls as the square of the distance. So if you're right next to the access point and you move 10 times further away, the signal is 100 times smaller and it's still perfectly fine. So your NIC has no idea what the voltage should be. There is no illegal range of voltage. So if 2 packets collide, there is no possible way to tell that that has happened. So you have to use GSMA-CA, which works like this. First, you send a request to send. Everybody shut up. I have something to say. Then you wait. Have you all shut up? Okay, I'm saying something. Did you receive it? Yes, you received it. Okay, the rest of you can talk now. This is what's happening in your coffee house. The entire bandwidth of the network is shared by everybody. If they have 10 megabits per second, that's everybody. And you only get half of that bandwidth to transfer files because you spend half of the bandwidth arguing about who's going to talk next. And with all that, there's still a very high chance, like 10 or 20%, that your packet will still be collided and destroyed before you get it there. You can see them in Wireshark, these red lines. So it's just amazingly inefficient and slow, but of course convenient because you don't have to plug in all the time. So you got stations that connect to the access point. This is called a basic service set, which is an access point and all the stations connected to that access point. And then if you have a large network like City College, you'll have multiple access points with a distribution system in the middle, and you'll have multiple basic service sets. And they all form the WLAN, the wireless local area network, which goes across many buildings in principle. Then you've got, in the United States, 802.11 is strange. We have 11 channels, but they are so broad they overlap, and there's really only 3 non-overlapping channels, and that's at 50% power, which is not very strongly overlapping. So it's pretty gruesome. We're all trying to fit into 11 channels that really overlap like crazy. At the 2.4 gigahertz bandwidth. At the 5 gigahertz bandwidth, which is the newer one, it's much better. There's something like 100 channels that don't overlap, so the problem is a lot smaller. There's infrared light is another way to send data. This is used by TV remote controls and generation of PDAs that I think is long gone. It's quite fast and quite nice. The problem is you really have to be pointing in the right direction. That's why radio just goes everywhere, so it's kind of annoying. All right, so 802.11a came out in '99. This is the first standard that would go at 5 gigahertz of the higher frequency band. It turned out it didn't have a very long range physically, not very many meters, so it wasn't much of a hit. The one that was a hit was 802.11b, which was slower, but at this time, modems were 56K, so 11 megabits sounded like plenty. And I wondered why they even made 11 megabits. That was ridiculous. You couldn't even get 1 megabit internet connections, but in practice, you don't get 11 at all. In practice, you're lucky to get a half or a quarter of that. So anyway, this was Wi-Fi. I had trouble selling this stuff. Ordinary consumers with no particular mathematical technological knowledge rebelled and said, wait a minute, what is this wireless stuff? My data is just going everywhere. Everyone's going to steal my data. So to comfort you, they invented WEP. Oh, no, it's all encrypted. It will all be fine. That was complete bullshit. This was cracked within 1 year of being released. WEP was terrible. It was a really poorly thought out, poorly implemented encryption system that had enormous flaws so that anybody can just hack in 5 minutes without the key. And everybody learned that pretty quickly. So 10 years later, the credit card and PCI DSS finally made people stop sending credit cards over it. They only let us get hacked for 10 years. And it led to multiple gigantic disasters. twice the largest credit card hack in history was done by stealing credit card numbers over WEP. It is industry self-regulation. You prove it's no, and the IEEE could not agree on the new standard. So they had to make WPA, which was not an IEEE standard. It was a non-standard protocol, and all the people started selling stuff anyway because there was pressure to have something better than WEP, because WEP was fantastically unsafe, and everybody knew that by about 2002. But there was nothing else to use until like 2008. It was kind of insane. Anyway, so 802.11e was intended to improve interference. 802.11g was the faster version of 802.11b. 802.11i is when we finally defined WPA as an official standard, which had already been used in an unapproved way for years by people desperate to have a wireless network that wasn't as appallingly unsafe as WEP networks. And 802.11n, finalized in 2009, this uses spatial streams as the new craziness, where it will send one stream of data from your laptop directly to the access point, bounce another off the floor, bounce another off the wall, bounce another off the ceiling, and add up all those bits to get up to this 600 megabits per second. So you have to have 3 antennas on the access point and 3 antennas on your NIC to have spatial resolution to get full performance out of it, which is kind of nuts, but it can be pretty fast, and that's what they look like. And 802.11ac came out after that. This is even faster, up to gigabits on the internet. Wider bands, more spatial channels. These are for sale, been for sale for a few years. I know they're supported by the Mac in the last couple of years. It's on that starting in 2013. Mac has an AC capability. Very few people have bothered to install AC routers, but that would be the next step up. And AD is the next one that can supposedly go up to 7 gigabits per second, but again, very short range, like the original A. So people have not really proposed this much for laptop networking. They proposed it for connecting the devices on your desk so you can get rid of all these cables. Now, this is actually a bone of contention of all the nerds I know. Their room is completely full of cables. The cables are all completely full of dust and cobwebs and stuff, and whoever's responsible for cleaning the place is always saying, get rid of all these cables. And everybody's living room, the people that care about interior design are, why are there wires everywhere? Get rid of them. And so there's actually a large market for this technology to get rid of all those short wires that foul up your house, especially if you care about interior design or cleanliness. And, you know, anyway, that's the way it is. So there's a lot of market for this, but it's not going to replace the wireless network we're using. There is a new generation coming out, however, because there was a problem with silicon. There's another frequency band available at 100 gigahertz. And that will be much, much faster. But until about 6 years ago, there was no silicon chips available to transmit or receive that you could make at a reasonable cost. And they finally solved that problem. So the newest generation is coming out of stuff at up around 100 gigahertz. And that'll be much, much faster. That'll be the next jump up. I don't know what the letters on that'll be, but there'll be a new generation coming up to be even faster, because every time you make it faster, people just get used to doing more. Now people expect to stream Netflix everywhere. And you know, they talked about this decades ago. Why doesn't your computer have a 3D representation of a human head talking to you that is smart enough to answer all your questions and do everything for you? And why isn't it playing like a beautiful 3D movie of everything you do? That's where we should go, right? And in order to do that, we'd have to have processors 1,000 times stronger and graphics 1,000 times better and the network 1,000 times faster. So there's no limit, you know. We're not going to have it fast enough and say we don't need it faster. There's more and more cool stuff that could be happening if it was faster. So iPhone 8 will have AD, so I guess it has it. I don't know if anybody's using it, but in principle, you've got it. And Hyperland is a European standard. I don't know if people are still using it. It's just pretty old, but it might have modern versions of it. 802.15 is short range. This is what Bluetooth is. There are several 802.15 standards, and Bluetooth is one of them. This connects, it's intended to be your personal area network, which connects the devices on your body, your phone to your earpiece, and so on. So that's Bluetooth. And the original Bluetooth only went at 2 megahertz, even bits per second. Now it's up to 24 megabits per second. And Bluetooth does have the ability to encrypt the traffic, but a lot of the devices use an older protocol, and they have a hardwired association pin of 0000 you can't change, and they pretty much send your data with no encryption, and anybody can intercept it. These things that go from your phone to your earpiece typically do that. They transmit the data like a walkie-talkie with no encryption. And Joshua Wright has videos where he shows how to do this. You can stand outside a coffee house and talk into other people's cell phones and interrupt their conversation and stuff. And if you really did that, the problem is it would be fantastically illegal. It's violating wiretap laws, but the technology is there. Those things are like heart pacemakers and such. Medical devices typically have no encryption, no password, and so anybody can just hack in and mess with it, and they're beginning to wake up to that. That's Joshua Corman's We Are the Cavalry project, is trying to bring computer security to medical devices that have understandably not cared about that. They've been focused on making the battery last long enough, making it small enough, making it work well enough, making it clean enough and non-allergic so they can actually save your life with it. And computer security was not on their roadmap. But now they're starting to wake up to, we also have to secure the wireless signals in addition to dealing with all the directly medical issues. Anyway, 802.16, I mentioned before, that's WiMAX that will fill a whole town with wireless signals from one big antenna up high. 802.20 is the standard to hit you while you're in an airplane or on BART or something, zipping past the transmission towers. And so WiMAX rolled out in America from a company called Clear. Then they sold to Sprint. Then Sprint abandoned it and rolled it back. So there was 4G, and then it went back to 3G because it became obsolete, sort of like the beta VCR. It barely had time to be deployed before it was made obsolete and replaced by LTE. LTE is the future. This is where everyone's going. It's gradually being deployed through all of America. It is much, much faster. It's 100 megabits per second instead of 10. So it just makes WiMAX obsolete, and that's where everybody is going. I must say, this deserves an award for the most useless algorithm, or useless acronym. I mean, that acronym tells you absolutely nothing. You can't even tell it's networking. You can't even tell it's wireless. You know, that's, at a hacking convention, one year, there was a product that won the worst acronym that year, and that was VOMIT. VOMIT was a hacking tool called Voice over Misconfigured Internet Telephony. It would let you intercept packetized phone calls and mess with them, but it was a good name. Anyway, so there's the standards. The one 802.11a and B are rare. Most everybody has G or N now, and the cooler guys have AC and AD, and everybody's using 206.15 with their Bluetooth. Those are the main ones that are in current use. And all right, got a few cahoots about that stuff. I see we got the online people included here. Let me get my cahoots up. This is, let's try 123. I'm getting so many of these, it's getting hard to find them because this is really a great product. Okay, 11, this must be the one. All right. Okay. I kept local copies of all my cahoots because I'm really bothered by the fact that I never paid these people any money. I feel like they're going to go broke at any moment. This is like, in my generation, it was the hippies. You have these people that forget to charge money for things. And you have these boring older people saying, wait a minute, you should charge a fee. Why should I do that? This is fine. It's not going to work if you don't charge a fee. And they're like, oh, you're just out of date. What's wrong with you? I'm still that guy. They should charge me $5 to use this. They really should. Anyway, I'll wait another few seconds. Okay, looks like we got everybody that's coming. So what's the name of the wireless network? Okay, SSID, Service Set Identifier. Which one goes at 11 megs? Which was pretty cool when it came out. Now that's pretty pathetic. All right, that's 802.11b, the first big hit in the marketplace. Which one goes to 7,000 megs, which is more like it? That's AD, but it's short range, but it sure is fast. Which one only goes 10 meters? Okay, that's Bluetooth. All right. And which one has been abandoned? That's WiMAX. I had a WiMAX phone. I bought it and it was like a beta VCR. It was pretty cool for about 2 months and that was it. You know, that was 3G phone. Anyway, okay. So A will have to tell me who they are. Shane, sounds like that might be a real name. C-Link, probably not. So if you guys want your points, you will have to tell me who you are at some point. We're at 10:44. I guess I'll start the next bit of the lecture and probably won't make it all the way before the break, but might as well keep going till the hour. So City College, Tim visits my classes. I don't think he visited this one this year. He went to a different one. But it is pretty amazing. If you look at wireless networks, Microsoft has fallen to where they're almost nowhere. And now they don't even have a phone. All they have is a tablet, but almost nobody uses them, although they're good. The Linux, there was a time 10 years ago when we had the big argument, is Windows or Linux going to win? Linux people said we need Linux. Linux won in the form of proprietary Linux, which is the iPhone and Android. Android is Linux and the iPhone is Unix, and it won to where it's 90% of all the traffic is Unix. Windows is below 10%, even all added together now. This is a couple of years old, as far as actual network traffic at City College. However, my friends in law enforcement tell me that if you go to the rest of the United States, it's still 90% Windows everywhere, at least on the laptops. But they can't do it on the phones. There's still no Windows phone. Microsoft has made, I think, 4 Windows phones. They've all completely flopped and been abandoned. They can't make it to the phone or the tablet in any effective way to reach any significant part of the market. And that's the Microsoft tablet, which is great, right? It's a really high quality device. And you can run virtual machines on it and everything, but still they're nowhere in the marketplace. I know, that's the Surface, right? Yeah, the Surface is very good. I've seen them, but they still don't sell unless you're a hardcore Microsoft guy. Nobody has them. Anyway, so you can run Wireshark. I should do this in monitor mode. So Wireshark, different versions of the operating system and different versions of Wireshark have different ways to do this. I attempt to put the instructions here to make myself less clumsy. Let's see if this works. I think it's now right in the capture options, which is a lot better than where it used to be. It used to be really hard to find. So it's Wireshark, capture options. There we go. So here I am. I can choose someplace in this box. I can choose monitor mode. There, it's on right now, monitor mode. And so if you don't turn on monitor mode, you see normal packets like TCP and UDP. But if you have monitor mode, you'll see everything. Yeah, that's what I want. Here's the broadcast packets. Here's the quality of service data. These are called beacon frames that announce the network. Here's acknowledgement of data, quality of service data, and someplace there's going to be request to send deauthentication packets. This is what you send to kick someone off the network. If you buy Cisco access points at the business class, you can turn on rogue access point suppression. They've got it turned on in Aloni. When I tried to take a class there and hack into wireless, it didn't work. So if you turn on another access point, it will notice that and kick all the clients off it. And this is one of the weaknesses of wireless networks. You can deauthenticate anybody at any time. And hackers do this in coffee houses. You're downloading a big thing, they want the bandwidth, they just kick you off and take you over. It's illegal, but it's certainly technically possible. The deauth frames do not have encryption or a password or anything. Anybody can do it. You can even deauth everybody in the room and the whole wireless will stop working, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. There's no way to detect you. You can detect the packets, but you can't tell where they're coming from unless you get a directional antenna and try to find somebody. And if you do that, it doesn't work very well in a room because the signal bounces off all the walls and just goes everywhere. Yeah.
Allowing like the MAC address or something?
It breaks the connection like a TCP reset. It just breaks one connection. You have to keep sending them. then your device will reconnect. But if I send one every second, you'll never get anywhere. And that's what you can do. And for what you do is in a coffee house, you send one every second for a few minutes, and whoever's downloading a BitTorrent gets disgusted and leaves, and then you use their bandwidth. People do this a lot. Anyway, that's the joy of raw packets, monitor mode. All right, so this gives a new security risk. In a wired networks, you had these things on desks and you tied them down and the company bought them and they're sort of in control of them. They feel like they know who's using the network. But with wireless networks, you don't even know who people are connecting to your network. They could be in the parking lot. They could be anywhere. They really could be anywhere. At DEF CON a few years ago, they had a contest to see how far they could send a Wi-Fi signal. And so they got an antenna 6 feet across and put it in the back of a pickup truck and drove up 2 mountains and sent a Wi-Fi signal like 57 miles from point to point. Because if you have a radio telescope, you could pick it up from another galaxy. I mean, it's going everywhere. So you really have no clue who's connecting to your network. So there's a standard to limit who's connecting to your network. And here's a few of them. Point-to-point protocol is what you typically use for your ISP to give you DSL service or something. Just go one end of the cable to the other. It sends a simple authentication up there. It can use something as simple as CHAP. CHAP will just send your password in plain text up the wire. This is not recommended, but in a real point-to-point network, it's not a big problem because you just have a cable. It's not a shared network. But you can send this over IP network, and then it would be a serious problem to have unencrypted data. So in order to deal with that, Microsoft, well, I think it has an IEEE standard first, but anyway, they invented CHAP. CHAP is Challenge Handshake Protocol, where instead of you sending the password, the server sends you a challenge, which is, say, a few random letters. And what you do is you add those letters to your password, hash it, and send the hash over the network. I can do the same calculation on the server, so I can tell if you got it right, but a hacker sniffing the network does not get your password, not directly. All they get is a hash, and they would have to crack the hash to steal your password. And so if it was a good hash algorithm, that would be difficult. The early versions of it, though, it was not very difficult. And by the way, it's subject to a serious man-in-the-middle attack. If I can just stand in the middle, the server sends the challenge, I hear the challenge, I pass the challenge to the client gives me the answer, I just send the server the answer, I'm in. So it does suffer from man-in-the-middle vulnerability. So anyway, EAP is the enhancement to let you use a variety of authentication methods, and some of them are good. For example, you can use digital certificates like HTTPS. Those are very good as long as the certificate is using an approved encryption protocol and the key is long enough, and those standards keep increasing every few years. But if you have a modern certificate, it's really quite good. This used to be too expensive to deploy on clients, but now Let's Encrypt is the free encryption service from EFF, and they're now the #1 provider of encryption. In fact, I was worried that they wouldn't, again, they're doing this for free. I must be a total evil old-fashioned capitalist. I figured they would just go broke and quit before long, but that did not happen at all. What happened is it's a huge hit, and now it's running the world. Let me find it. I saw it in my news links. If I can find it, it should be right in one of these first days. Yeah, it's there, SSL issuer popularity. This is the current data of the people that should issue SSL certificates. And this is from 2016 to 2018, and the green line is Let's Encrypt. They're now #1 by far, over 50%, and everybody else is in the small change. And these are people like Komodo and GoDaddy and DigiCert and Amazon are all down in the single digits. So everybody's using these free certificates. The thing is staying up. Everybody trusts them. It's pretty awesome. So I guess you could just put a certificate on every device, and that would be much better than a password. It's not popular yet, but there's no longer a reason not to do it because of the cost of the certificate. Anyway, Kerberos is what you use on Windows domains. This is an MIT system which has tickets and ticket granting tickets and complicated hashes that give you a temporary access to one resource, and it sends these cryptographic things over the network which are related to your password but only indirectly. And it is possible to attack your password by attacking the Kerberos hashing, but what's more effective is to attack the protocol itself through defects in the protocol, and that's what Benjamin Delphi in New Zealand has a tool called Mimikatz that does that, and he's very, very vigorous at finding the flaws in each version of Microsoft Active Directory, and he can steal the ticket granting ticket and issue his own tickets, and they'll be accepted. And he can even steal the golden ticket, which is supposed to be giving the center of the system, which is the key distribution center, the ability to issue tickets for 25 or 50 years or something. So he's fantastic at hacking into it. But it does, you just have to get used to it. Nothing is ever perfect. This is much better than sending plain text passwords or chat, but it's not perfect. There's some way to attack everything. So the X509 certificate is the certificates I was talking about that people are getting from Let's Encrypt. This is a standard X509. It identifies, it's just like an ID card, like a driver's license. It tells who you are, a public key, and then information about who issued it so anybody can verify it. So you can see it. And in fact, these things are interesting to look at. They change a lot. So here's NetTrack. They're a secure website. So if I click on this, the certificate is valid, and I should be able to view the certificate itself. So I wonder if this will get bigger. It doesn't get bigger. Okay, I'll zoom in for the people in the room. All right, so here's the authority, chain of authority. NetTrack.info claims to be somebody. They offer me a certificate from somebody called Let's Encrypt, and I can trust them because they're vouched for by DST Root CA. Now, the reason I can trust DST Root CA is because the manufacturer of my browser just built them in. And you'll find those here in settings probably, and then look for certificates. Should do it. Yes, manage certificates. They keep moving it around, but the search engine helps. So here you are. I have system roots. Should be it. There we are. And my certificates, perhaps? Certificates, here we are there. Here's the trusted certificates. They're in the operating system. So this is put there by either Google, putting it in Chrome, or by Apple, putting it in the OS, different people. But I think it's mostly the browsers. So there's this long list of people you trust, about 100, and you trust anything these people say. At least that's the way it was until about 2 years ago. This led to enormous problems, as several of these guys are incredibly sleazy and got hacked, and all their stuff got stolen. A Syrian attacker called the Syrian Cyber Army, which at that time was one 19-year-old loyal to Assad in Syria, hacked into like 6 of these authorities and stole everything. And then he dumped publicly all the data from 2 of them, proving he could do it. And he said, I've got 4 more I'm not going to tell you about. So he could intercept these and forge fake certificates and get into HTTPS. And the other thing is there's people here that we really don't want to trust, like China. The government of China is here as a trusted certificate authority. I'm not seeing them right away, but I know they're in here because they have to be, because otherwise you couldn't view Chinese websites because they're signed by the government of China. But the original trust model here was really messed up. If they're on this list, you trust everything they say. If they're not on this list, you trust nothing. That's not really right. I would probably like to have a rule that says the China authority is only trusted for sites in China. And not if, for example, I go to Google and it's signed by China today, my browser should probably say, hey, that doesn't look right. And so that's what's happened. There's been a huge push over the last several years to improve the system. And what has happened is a non-standard improvement has come out. There have been a few attempts to make a standard one. There's a header, HSTS header you can put on your website, which will cause the browser to remember the certificate authority and warn the viewer when it changes or block it. And also Chrome put in Google just a list of who should be signing the top 1,000 sites. So if you use Google and you go to a popular site and it has a forged signature, you'll probably be warned. But it again only protects Chrome users. But people are attempting to add more security tests to this system because this turned out to not be as trustworthy as it should be. Although in practice, this works pretty well. There are some scary attacks like the ones you'll do in the projects, the SSL strip attack, where you just downgrade it to HTTP. That is finally being fixed this year. That's been a dead killer for years, and it's finally being fixed effectively later this year. This is a project right here, your last project, Project 21, SSL strip. This is a devastating attack from Moxie Marlinspike. What you do, you open a website and it's secure. So if you run this software, SSL strip, it sets up a proxy and it takes HTTPS connections and downgrades them to HTTP and then delivers them. And until right about now, browsers will totally fall for this. You can log into a site and it will not be secure and it really won't stop you. But now Firefox, I think Chrome has said, I think starting next month, they're just going to put an error message on the screen for every HTTP site all the time. And for about a year, they've been warning you every time you log in, and it's not an HTTPS site. So that's going to pressure people into fixing it. It turns out that's the effective place to do it. By embarrassing them in the browser, the companies will probably be forced to move up to HTTPS, and that seems to be happening. And so that's working. So this kind of attack is going to stop being so effective, and this system will be more trustworthy. In practice, it's always been quite good. This is a lot better than plain text transmission, but there are ways in, and the mathematical people that make this, like Moxie Marlinspike and Bruce Schneier, they're mathematicians. They say, we could make a really strong system where nobody can get in at all. Why do we settle for a system that has holes in it? So they're always plugging the holes and improving it, which is good. Anyway, so your certificate contains a public key. It tells you so it tells you the identity of the company. It tells you who told you, who verifies the identity, and then it gives you a public key. So now you can encrypt stuff with this public key, and the only person on earth that can read it is that company, and you know who they are. So that's the purpose of it. It makes it possible to send secure communications over the internet when you do not trust any of the intermediate parties. You don't trust the wireless network, you don't trust your ISP or your company or anything, but none of them can open the packets. This relies on this miracle of public key encryption, which we'll talk more about next time, which only started in 1970. It's a new technology, and it is about to come to an end. As quantum computers come, the current generation of public key encryption will stop being trustworthy, and we will have to have something new, and that is underway. The first 20 candidates have been, the National Institute of Standards is holding a contest to develop quantum-resistant cryptography, and they've got the first 20 candidates, and 2 weeks ago they killed off the first one. Somebody proposed a new system, and one of the mathematicians hacked into it so fast they can break in 1 minute. So they blew it away, and they said this company has a history of doing this. They've been in the business submitting terrible cryptographic standards for years, all of which are wrong-headed and just get hacked. But that's how it works. You propose them, everybody hacks each other, a bunch of them go down in flames, and a few survivors get there, and one of them gets the government stamp of approval, unfortunately, which tends to include putting in a secret backdoor for the NSA. So a lot of people either use that one because they want to work with the government and the military, or they use the runners-up because they're bitter, cynical people that don't trust the government to tell you the truth. I don't know how anybody could imagine that the U.S. government is not telling you the truth in the modern world. You just have to have something wrong with you. But anyway, all right, so I think I got, enough of this. We should take a break. We're at 11. We'll take a break till 10. I'm going to pause the recording. Okay, so hopefully we're back on the road here. Let's talk about this stuff. And here's another chat message coming in. I was there on Thursday. Good. Okay. I got you, Michael. Also RSA on Thursday. Good. Okay, good. I'm glad you folks are going. These things are good for you. All right. So there were, in that time period I was talking about, when there was WEP, wired equivalent privacy, and everyone knew it was broken, but there was no official standard to improve it, many companies developed attempts to improve WEP with proprietary attempts, and this was one of them, LEAP. Oh, another message? Okay, just a moment. Let's see what the other chat message is. A couple of them. Okay, Alan was there. Alan, okay, good. I'm making note of that. Alan was also there for the RSA on Thursday. Good. Okay. Good. All right. Anyway, so the LEAP was one of them. This was Cisco's attempt to improve it. Lightweight, extensible authentication protocol, and Joshua Wright, who I mentioned earlier, hacked it. It turned out to be vulnerable to an offline dictionary attack, and I think I added this to the project. It's pretty easy to do with Kali Linux. You can hack into VPNs that use this protocol with the same tool he wrote called Asleep. It's not as bad as WEP, but it does have some hash you can steal from the network, and you can then crack it offline, and you can just try dictionary millions of passwords until you get in, so it's not great. And this was in the early days of ethical hacking, and here's the kind of response you got maybe 10 years ago from every company. If you would make a hacking tool and warn about a vulnerability, the official position of Microsoft and most companies was you should just shut up, and better yet, lock these people in prison, and we'll just keep selling defective stuff, and nobody will find the hole, and everything will be fine. So their position was, this guy laid waste to millions of dollars of infrastructure. We sold broken junk to people, and it's vulnerable. And the guy that told us about the vulnerability is the one responsible for people getting hurt. And that was the standard industry reaction. People have only now begun to get over this and realize that you ought to actually make secure stuff. And the people telling you it is insecure are not the bad guys. The bad guys are hacking into it and not telling you. And I think the big corner has turned there. I think now Microsoft has bug bounties, Apple does, Facebook does, and the US military. And last month, the first program, the second DoD bug bounty program went through, and the first civilian government bug bounty went through. So now government systems in the military and outside the military have now publicly admitted that they understand ethical hacking and they appreciate it, and they do want you to tell them if you find problems, and they're not going to lock you up. And so that's good. It's taken 20 years to get this far. This is why DEF CON is an underground conference. Many people will still fire you for going to DEF CON, and a lot of people think if you're any kind of hacker, you're just a dangerous criminal. There's still some of that, but it's changing. Slowly, companies are waking up to realizing that there is a group of ethical hackers out there that are good people, and they are going to irritate you by sending you dangerous attacks against your devices, and that's not a bad thing. You shouldn't be punishing them for that. Verizon did this in 2010. These guys found a vulnerability and disclosed it, and so they called them narcissistic vulnerability pimps. These people make their money going to conferences, getting rich out of ruining our lives and destroying our products. And so the response, this is where I learned this too. At this time, it was very contentious in security. And the thing they did was made t-shirts and hats with narcissistic vulnerability pimp on it and wear it around. That's what I did when people sent me insults. I have a whole generation of t-shirts that were all the insults people posted about me online. That's the way to do it. I think we learned this from the rap stars. If somebody calls you a dirty word, wear it proudly. That's the best way to cope with it. Anyway, EAPTLS is another one that requires certificates at both ends, considered very secure, and until recently this was considered impractical because of the cost of getting certificates. Like I'm saying, it's probably time to revisit that calculation. Now the certificates are apparently free and just fine. PEEP and Microsoft PEEP are also considered quite secure, and they only have a certificate on the server, not on the client, like HTTPS, and that's a well-established model of security. So 802 works like this, all these 802.1x things. You have a supplicant, which is somebody trying to connect. There's an access point, which is the point that takes the traffic. Then they have an authentication server that has your credentials, for example, a database of passwords on a Radius server or something else. So you try to connect, the access point asks you to pass up some credentials. It then sends the credentials over to the authentication server, which decides whether the credentials are okay. And if they are, it then lets you at the sensitive infrastructure. So WEP was the original vulnerability that came, original encryption system that came out with 802.11b. And it turned out to make several serious flaws in its thinking that made it vulnerable. And so WPA was the upgrade. And the original WPA was intended to only be used for a couple of years because it was intended to run on WEP equipment with nothing but a software upgrade. So it was designed not to be the most secure, but to be compatible with the old hardware that was designed for WEP. So all WPA is WEP, and it keeps changing the key for every packet. Because the WEP attacks require you to collect 50,000 or more packets, all with the same key, and then you do a mathematical comparison of them to deduce the key. So if you keep changing the key, you can't do that attack anymore. And so WPA had 4 Band-Aids that were put over the specific holes in WEP. So everyone figured it will just slow down the attackers for a couple of years, and then they'll find a way to work around these little patches, and you'll be vulnerable again. So it's just to improve security until we can go to WPA2, which is much more powerful, but it requires faster processors on the routers. So you'll have to replace the hardware to get there. That was the plan. And so here's the enhancements. It has a message integrity check, so you cannot record someone else's traffic and replay it, which is what you did with WEP attacks. It has an initialization vector, which is added to packets, and it's extended so that the original initialization vector was too short. And it has MAC addresses used to make sure every link uses a different key, so you can't take traffic from one device and replay it as if it came from another device. And I say it has a rekeying mechanism, so it keeps changing the keys. So if you accumulate a lot of packets, you cannot do this mathematical comparison to deduce the key. And that turned out to be very effective. Now, it also added 1021X to WPA, and that means you can now, if you want to, do enterprise versions. So there's WPA and WPA2, and each one of them has a home mode and an enterprise mode. So anyway, WPA2 can run on newer hardware, and it's faster than WPA on newer hardware and much more secure. Uses this thing called CCMP, which is a better kind of encryption. And here's the other issue. That's why there's four things. There's WPA and WPA2, and then there's the two modes, basically the home mode and the business mode. The home mode is pre-shared key, where you type in a key on every device, and it's likely to be a common word. So people might guess. And when you buy a new computer and connect it, you have to type in the key. And if you want to deauthorize one of the devices, you'd have to change the key and then go change it everywhere else. So it really only works for small home networks. It's not very practical for a business where you're going to hire and fire people and expand. So that's the thing here. 8021X is where you have to have a server, like a Radius server with a whole database of credentials, and you can add and subtract people as necessary, and that's appropriate for a business. And you can do either of these with WPA or WPA2. So in 2008 and 2009, there were a couple of new attacks on WPA that made people worried. They managed to do a little bit of evil, like they were able to replay packets for up to 18 minutes under certain conditions when they shouldn't have been able to replay them at all. So people were afraid it was finally breaking, like WEP, but these cracks did not get bigger. There was still no way to crack into WPA, the original system, unless people can guess your key. But people have never trusted it very far because it was a very small move from good bad old WEP. Unfortunately, around this time, a new feature was added to Wi-Fi called WPS, which ruined everything. And this is true of almost everything you buy now. This is Wi-Fi protected setup. It is a convenience feature to make it easier to share the key on a home network. So you can press a button on your router or click something in the config page and press a button on your NIC, and it will now send the key for just a few seconds over the network. Now that is not a serious vulnerability. The problem is they chose a key that is just too short. I couldn't believe it. I read about this in the Microsoft document first. I was teaching Microsoft tech support, and they said, we have this system that will automatically generate a key and automatically send it. And I said, that will be more secure because then it could use like a 25-character random key that no one could remember. That would be great. But I didn't learn the details until years later. What it actually uses is an 8-digit key. And the 8-digit key is not even 8 digits. It's 2 separate 4-digit keys. And the last digit is a mathematical checksum of the others. So the total number of possible keys is only 10,500. And if you type in a 25-character random key, it will reduce it to this number and use this number anyway. So it completely destroys WPA security. So there's now a simple way to break into every modern WPA device, or WPA2 for that matter, if they have this feature turned on, which is turned on by default with everything you can buy, and you just have to try every key, and there's a tool in Backtrack and Corley that does that called Reaver. And this is my Reaver attack, cracking the key. My password was long, awful password, which you would never find, but it only had to try 10,000 keys. This took me 19 hours on my network. Now, in practice, this is not as bad as it appears because most home devices are so poorly made that they cannot survive this attack. They will just crash. And so it is secure through denial of service. It will crash after you try 10 or 20 or 30 keys. So you can't get to 10,500 unless the guy will restart the device about 100 times without figuring out that something is wrong. So yeah, I couldn't even do this to any of my routers. I had to go buy a $150 enterprise class router to test this. And when you're done, most router manufacturers have figured out all by themselves that that doesn't look very good. So they put in a non-standard proprietary fix where it'll like kick you out after 10 bad guesses or something. Because even, you don't have to be a genius to say, that doesn't look very secure. So the standard is awful though. And I think Cisco deserves the special badge of dishonor here because if you buy Cisco gear, it has WPS and it has a configuration page, and you can go to the configuration page and turn off WPS. And if you do that, you can't use it anymore, but the attack still works. It just stops you from getting to it, but it doesn't turn off the underlying vulnerability. So that's really rude. And this is why some students said, what I'm going to do is just get rid of the firmware and put on DDWRT, because DDWRT never supported this at all. So that's one way to get rid of it, or you know it's gone. Anyway, this seems to be the way security always is. You make something good and then some idiot adds something to it to ruin it. Anyway, so war driving is just to find access points. Back in 10 years ago and earlier, you could actually drive around and find unsecured access points and use them to get on the internet. So a lot of people would do this and then trade the information. I used to do it here, but I quit a few years ago because it stopped being interesting because all the networks were secure. We went every year from 2008 to 2015. We'd drive around the city and map it and see how many networks were insecure. And when we started, half of them were running WEP and 30% were unencrypted entirely. WPA was rare. And as you can see, WPA and WPA2 rose to where now essentially everything is WPA or WPA2 except the open ones that are deliberately open because they're coffee houses and stuff. And there's only 1% of people still using WEP. And that's just because the defaults on devices have changed. Very few people are still using equipment from 10 years ago that ran WEP. So there's really no point. The thing that I should replace this with is Bluetooth or walking, where you drive around and pick up all the Bluetooth signals and see how insecure those are. But the equipment, hardware and software to do that is not really ready yet. This is there's a Bluetooth village at DEF CON, and there's a community making Bluetooth devices. You can run Bluetooth devices into Wireshark, but Bluetooth jumps across 80 channels, and there isn't any software yet that can follow that to let you sniff Bluetooth traffic yet. They're working on it. Every year they get a little further with the Bluetooth hacking. So at some point, that'll be the next logical thing to do, is exposing the level of Bluetooth insecurity. But not yet. So you just drive around with an antenna and scan for these SSIDs from the beacon frames, and you find out what's out there. One old tool used for this was NetStumbler. There's a more modern tool called Kismet. Is the Linux-based tool that is much more powerful, but of course you have to have Linux and it's somewhat harder to run. It'll pick up more devices, and you can even record the packets. If you do that, that might be illegal. Google was doing this. They were driving around mapping. A lot of people do this. They map all the Wi-Fi in the world. There are three companies I know that do it. One is Skyhook. Another is Google with those cars. And the third one is Wiggle, the wireless internet geolocation engine. These are companies that map the whole world, all the Wi-Fi. And this is useful for a lot of reasons. Google does it because, and they want to feed it into the Android phones. That's why most people do it, because geolocation of your device by satellites to find your physical location is not very accurate. That is because the US military put up those satellites and they made them extremely good to where they can locate you within a couple of inches, and they use them to target cruise missiles. And they do not want other people doing it, so the civilian access has something like 50 feet of randomness added to it to make it less accurate, so you cannot use it to target weapons. And therefore, you can't really put the dot on your little map and put it exactly where your car is. So in order to get your car location more accurate, cell phones and tablets use Wi-Fi. So they have a map of the MAC address of all the Wi-Fis everywhere, and they take the signal of the Wi-Fis near you to figure out where you are more precisely. And therefore, they have a fleet of cars out there driving around constantly mapping the Wi-Fi because people replace them and stuff, and they have to keep it more or less up to date. So that's the game. AirCrack NG is a web cracking tool in Corley you can use, and used to be a project where you did it here. A lot of people now get these Wi-Fi pineapples. I think somebody just gave me one of these as a prize at B-Sides or something. These automatically does a lot of these wireless attacks, wireless man-in-the-middle attacks, stealing passwords. If I can find it, I'll bring it up to the lab. People can play with it. These things are quite popular among hackers. If you take one to DEF CON and you don't change the default password, they will totally hack it and fill it with blasphemous swearing at you to mock you for taking an unsecure device to DEF CON. They were doing that last year. Anyway, if you go to DEF CON and turn on your card, you will find your coffee house, your home, the airport, the Russian embassy, the FBI, everybody. There are so many fake wireless networks there, just what you would expect. And when I went to RSA, they told me that there was fake phone man-in-the-middle attacks going on at RSA, which is not where I expected it, but they said it was a vendor demonstrating something. But anyway, DEF CON, there's definitely fake man-in-the-middle phone jackers, and there are fake ATMs. There was one in the casino. Somebody put up an ATM that looked kind of funny, and it had this dark glass in the bottom, and you could see the computer in there. There was a laptop, fake ATM. You know, anything goes at DEF CON. Be suspicious. Some people don't even take their computers. I always do, but be aware of the purpose of the con is every hacker in the world is there doing stuff. I went there one year and there was a guy with a backpack with antennas sticking out walking through the open areas. And what it would do is man in the middle all the wireless traffic and change all the pictures to goatsy, which is a horrible, offensive porn image. So he's walking through the room and people are like freaking out and slapping down their laptop and everything you view. And, you know, this kind of stuff happens at DEF CON. It's a free fire network. You go there for this kind of stuff. I went there one year and I had a new IP version 6 attack that would kill every Windows machine and there was no patch. And I said, this will be great. I'll kill every machine at DEF CON. But I couldn't connect to the network. It was secure through unavailable. I said, this is the only place on earth you can do something like that. I could blue screen every Windows machine and you can get away with that at DEF CON, but no. Anyway, such is life. So you can set up anti-war driving software. There's honeypots where you put up fake wireless networks to try to attack people. There's a thing called fake AP and black alchemy fake AP that puts up fake access points to try to make it hard for the attacker to find a good one. These are not very effective. They're kind of a cute stunt, but I don't know anybody that's actually using them in a real network. You can put metal in the paint you put your walls with, so try to keep the Wi-Fi signal in the building so it doesn't leak out so much into the parking lot, and that might help. You can use EAP. There's two versions of WEP, one shorter and longer. In practice, it doesn't make any difference. The short one you can crack in 5 minutes, the long one you can crack in 10 minutes. So just use WPA. Don't waste your time. You should never really trust your wireless network very much. The original intuition of customers was correct. The fact that it's going through the radio spectrum means it's vulnerable in ways that your wired network is not vulnerable. So you should not trust wireless connections directly into your high privilege data. You should trust them like DMZ data, where you put your web server. Your wireless network is likely to contain unapproved people. So if you're going to let someone into your highly privileged data, you should force them to pass through another layer of authentication. Like make sure they're using a VPN and make sure they really have a company name and password to get in here. Don't believe that they're really an employee just because they got on the wireless. And there's MAC address filtering. It's very easy to defeat. You can just do it with the ifconfig on Linux and Unix-based devices. And in Windows, you can do it in Device Manager. Just go into your device properties. You can just type in the MAC for most NICs. It's so easy, I couldn't even give anybody any points for it as a project. It is so easy to defeat MAC address filtering. Change your MAC address to anything you want. All right. However, MAC address filtering has its place. I used to use it in coffee houses because encryption does slow down your router, and it slowed down my phone. So to get the maximum speed, I would use a really weak defense like MAC address filtering, and then in practice, nobody in the coffee house was using my network, even though they could have, and I was able to get enough speed. Anyway, I've got another set of cahoots here. And Pedro discovered a weakness in the Kahoot system, so that's good. I'll get extra credit for that. He found out that he could see my Kahoot answers, so that's totally cool. So if you find a way to hack my stuff, that's great. It's worth extra credit. And that counts. Cheating on the Kahoot totally counts. That's why this stuff is extra credit. There are several ways I know to do it. By the way, if you go to my CTFs, there's these winners boards, and there's a bunch of ways to cheat and get on there. There's, none of my stuff is secure, largely because I just can't be bothered, but also because I really don't care, because if you find a way to hack my stuff, that's probably just as valuable as the lesson I was attempting to teach anyway. So, as you all know, you can pretty easily cheat on the homework. You're taking images, and there's a bunch of ways to make fake images. And I hope not too much of that is happening, but it just isn't worth the bother to do a lot about it. Well, it is worth extra credit. It may not be included as extra credit in this class. If you do it, it's worth extra credit. I may have, it should be a project for EasyCTF. Oh, there was a real EasyCTF contest. Let me just take a look, because I'm waiting a minute anyway for latecomers. Let's check the scores. I think there is an EasyCTF project. Oh, there's a PicoCTF project. Oh, and what happened, like Easy CTF is a real contest that comes by. And that's not an official project, but they're all worth points. I put them on my homepage. Those are only available for like a few days every year. And if you participate in a real CTF, that's definitely worth extra credit. So, and there's some coming up, by the way. If you guys want to do a real CTF, PAC CTF is running right now. You can register and do it. And after that comes MITRE CTF. I guess that's ending today. NCL you'd have to pre-register for. But here's another one coming up in May. No, this one here goes till the 30th. And on top of that, I discovered you can only do it for 2 days. It's up for like 2 weeks, but you have to pick 2 days and do those 2 days. So if you want to do this, it's worth extra credit. And I saw students doing it, looks fine. So there's always a bunch of those, and those are probably the best thing for you to do. They're more up to date and more difficult than my projects. So I highly encourage you, do some real CTFs. Anyway, I have cahoots somewhere here. Let me see if I can find them. Is that the one? Well, let's try it and see. Do I have another one? Oh, good. I don't know if you can even have two at the same time. All right. Okay. Sending passwords in plain text. Okay, that's PAP, Password Authentication Protocol. Not a good idea. What format is used for digital certificates? Okay, they are X509. That's what they are. I guess that's an IEEE number. I don't really know. So which one fixes weaknesses in web? TKIP, Temporal Key Integrity Protocol. It is one of the things that makes WPA, one of the improvements in web that forms WPA. All right, which protocol requires an authentication server? Okay, that's 8021X. And which protocol is vulnerable to a simple brute force stack? That's WPS. WEP is not. The attack is much more complicated than brute force. They were smart enough, like the key is 128 bits in one version, and you can't do a brute force attack on that. But WPS, you can. There's only 10,500 possible keys. So it lowered the security of WPA and WPA2 down below the security of WEP in practice. And that's the way it still is. Kind of evil. So A has won twice. Bennis, I think that's a real name, and Force is a real name. But there's two people, I don't know who they are, Clink and A. So if Clink and A want their points, they're going to have to tell me who they are. Other than that, there's a half-hour gap. Then there's a Hackers Club meeting, which is upstairs. They're going to do a CTF. I imagine they're doing that PAC CTF. And I see a chat message might be telling me who someone is. Aha, okay, yes. Okay, that's Bennis, good. All right, and Forrest, you need Clinks and A. Clinks and A are going to lose their points unless they tell me who they are. I'll wait a few seconds and see if they're going to send a chat message. Oh, you're one of them? Good. Is A here? Oh, good. You're both in the room. Oh, good. Then I'll stop the share and we'll just, you can come up here and tell me who you are. Good.